Walking into the lion's den, wearing an ill-fitting suit, she looked every bit the broke, desperate single mother her millionaire ex-husband expected to crush. As the tech mogul sat laughing with his high-priced lawyers, ready to bury her in debt and take her child, he forgot the golden rule of power. The loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. That laughter died the instant the courtroom doors swung open, replaced by a silence that made blood run cold. This is the true story of the day. A nobody destroyed an empire without saying a single word. The heavy oak doors of the Superior Court of Manhattan felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, but Sarah pushed them open with a singular, trembling hand. It was 8:58 a.m. on a Tuesday. Outside, the New York rain was relentless, a gray sheet of misery that had soaked the hem of her trousers. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of floor wax and old despair. Sarah Holloway paused at the threshold, tightening her grip on the frayed handle of her briefcase. It wasn't a briefcase, really. It was a laptop bag she'd bought at a Goodwill in Queens for $5. The courtroom was already full. That was the first bad sign. Usually, family court hearings for custody and asset division were private, somber affairs. But Richard Rick Jasson wasn't a man who did things quietly. He was the CEO of Jasson Dynamics, a man who had graced the cover of Forbes and GQ in the same month. To him, this wasn't a legal proceeding. It was a spectator sport. As Sarah walked down the center aisle, the murmurs began. "Is that her?" Someone whispered loudly. "She looks. Is that tired? Look at that suit. Is that polyester?" Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the empty table on the left side of the room, the defendant's table. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit she had dug out of the back of her closet, a relic from a life she barely remembered. It was slightly too large in the shoulders, making her look shrunken, defeated. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, still damp from the rain. On the right side of the room sat Rick. He looked immaculate. He was wearing a bespoke navy Brioni suit, the kind that cost more than Sarah's apartment rent for a year. His hair was gelled to perfection, his jawline sharp, his posture relaxed. He was leaning back in his chair, whispering something to his lead attorney, Charles Montgomery. Montgomery was a legend in New York for all the wrong reasons. They called him the Viper of Fifth Avenue. He didn't just win cases, he annihilated the opposition. He charged $1,200 an hour, and Rick had hired him solely to crush Sarah. As Sarah pulled out her chair, the legs scraped loudly against the floor. Screech, Rick covered his mouth to hide a laugh. Montgomery didn't bother hiding his. He just smirked, tapping his gold fountain pen against a stack of legal documents that looked to be a foot high. Miss Holloway, Judge Cynthia Cross, boomed from the bench. She was a stern woman with a reputation for hating time-wasters. She peered over her spectacles, looking from Rick's army of 5 lawyers to Sarah, who sat entirely alone. "Where is your counsel?" Sarah stood up. Her knees were shaking, but she forced her voice to be steady. "I am representing myself, Your Honor." A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. It wasn't just Rick's team. It was the press in the back, the clerks, even the bailiff looked amused. "Pro se?" Judge Cross sighed, taking off her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Miss Holloway, this is a complex custody case involving significant assets and intellectual property disputes. Mr. Jasson is suing you for full custody of your daughter, Lily, and defamation regarding the ownership of the Ether Protocol. Are you sure you want to proceed without a lawyer?" "I cannot afford a lawyer, Your Honor," Sarah said quietly. "Mr. Jasson frozen my bank accounts 3 weeks ago." "Objection." Montgomery shot up, buttoning his suit jacket. "We froze the joint accounts to prevent the dissipation of marital assets. Miss Holloway has a history of erratic spending." "I bought groceries," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. "I bought diapers, and a one-way ticket to Zurich that was canceled only after we flagged it." Montgomery lied smoothly. "That's a lie," Sarah cried out. "Order," Judge Cross slammed her gavel. "Miss Holloway, if you are representing yourself, you will adhere to the rules of this court. No outbursts. Sit down." Sarah sat, She felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She could feel Rick's eyes on her, that predatory gaze she had once mistaken for love. He leaned over to Montgomery, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "This is going to be easier than I thought. She looks like she sleeps in a dumpster. Let's wrap this up by lunch. I have a tea time at the Hamptons." They laughed, a cruel, guttural sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were red and chapped from scrubbing floors at the diner where she worked under the table. She looked at her cheap plastic watch. 9:05 a.m. She took a deep breath. "Just hold on," she told herself. "Just 5 more minutes." To understand the humiliation of that morning, you have to understand who Sarah Holloway really was, or rather, who Rick Jasson said she was. 6 years ago, Sarah had been a brilliant but shy doctoral student at MIT. She specialized in algorithmic cryptography. Rick had been the charming MBA student from Harvard who swept her off her feet. He was loud, charismatic, and ambitious. She was quiet, focused, and brilliant. They were the perfect pair. She built the engine, he sold the car. Or so she thought. 2 years into their marriage, Sarah had cracked a code. She called it the Ether Protocol, a way to encrypt data so securely that quantum computers couldn't break it. It was worth billions. She had written the code on napkins, in notebooks, on the back of receipts. Rick had taken those receipts. When he launched Jasson Dynamics, he claimed he was the sole inventor. He told the press Sarah was just his supportive wife, a former student who dropped out to raise their daughter. He slowly erased her professional existence. When Sarah finally threatened to expose him, the divorce papers arrived the next day. But they weren't just divorce papers. They were a declaration of war. Rick used his wealth to paint a narrative. He paid doctors to claim Sarah was mentally unstable. He hired private investigators to stalk her, making her paranoid, then used her paranoia as proof of her instability. He cut off her access to money. He isolated her from her friends. Now, in court, Montgomery stood up to deliver his opening statement. "Your Honor," Montgomery began, pacing the floor like a shark in a tank, "we are here today to save a child. Lily Jasson is 5 years old. She deserves stability. She deserves a home. Her mother, the defendant," he gestured dismissively at Sarah, "is currently residing in a studio apartment in the Bronx with black mold issues. She has no verifiable income. She claims to be the inventor of my client's technology, a delusion that proves her break from reality. We are asking for full legal and physical custody, with supervised visitation for the mother only." He dropped a heavy binder on the judge's bench. Exhibit A, Miss Holloway's financial records. 0 savings, immense debt. Exhibit B, affidavits from 3 psychiatrists whom she refused to see, stating she likely suffers from delusions of grandeur. Rick watched Sarah, a smirk playing on his lips. He mouthed one word to her: crazy. Sarah didn't react. She opened her battered laptop bag. She didn't pull out legal pads. She didn't pull out a frantic list of defenses. She pulled out a single, thin black folder and a phone. "Miss Holloway," Judge Cross said, looking bored, "it is your turn for an opening statement. Do you have one?" Sarah stood up again. The trembling in her legs had stopped. The room went quiet, expecting a tearful plea for mercy, expecting her to beg for money or time. "I do, Your Honor," Sarah said. Her voice was different now. The waver was gone. It was cold, precise. "But before I begin, I would like to request that the court allow a witness to enter the building. He is running a few minutes late due to the weather." Montgomery laughed. "A witness? Who? The manager at the diner she works at? We don't have time for character witnesses who can't tell the difference between a tort and a tart." The gallery chuckled. "No," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Rick's. "Not a character witness, a material witness regarding the financial assets of the Jasson estate." "Your Honor," Montgomery groaned, "this is a stalling tactic. She has no witnesses on the list." "Actually," Sarah said, "I filed an amended witness list at 8 a.m. this morning with the clerk. It is within the procedural time limit." Judge Cross looked at her clerk, who nodded, looking wide-eyed at his computer screen. She did, Your Honor. It was filed electronically. Fine, the judge said, checking her watch. Who is this witness, Miss Halloway? Sarah checked her watch again. 9:10 a.m. He should be here right now. At that exact moment, a low rumble began to vibrate through the floorboards of the courtroom. It wasn't thunder. It was too rhythmic, too mechanical. It sounded like a cavalcade. Outside the courthouse, the dreary rain was suddenly illuminated by flashing lights. But they weren't police lights. A convoy of 5 black Cadillac Escalades, flanked by 2 motorcycles, screeched to a halt in the no parking zone right in front of the main steps. The security guards at the front entrance stepped forward to yell at the drivers, but the doors of the SUVs opened in unison. Out of the lead car stepped 4 men. They were giants, wearing earpieces and suits that cost more than Rick's car. They didn't look like private security. They looked like military contractors. They moved with a terrifying synchronization, clearing a path on the sidewalk. Inside the courtroom, the noise from the hallway became audible. Heavy footsteps, lots of them. Thud, thud, thud. Rick frowned, turning around in his chair. What is that noise? Montgomery looked annoyed. Probably a transfer of a high-profile felon. Ignore it. But they couldn't ignore it. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were pushed wide by 2 men in dark sunglasses who immediately took positions on either side of the frame. They stood with hands clasped in front of them, scanning the room with professional menace. The laughter in the gallery died instantly. Then, a third man entered. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s. He had silver hair swept back, a neatly trimmed beard, and he walked with a cane that had a handle made of pure ivory. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that whispered, "Old money, not the flashy wealth of Rick Jasson, but the deep, quiet, terrifying wealth that builds nations." Behind him walked 2 younger aides, carrying metal briefcases, handcuffed to their wrists. The older man walked down the center aisle. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers. He walked straight to the defendant's table. Rick Jasson's face went pale. He gripped the edge of his table so hard his knuckles turned white. "No," Rick whispered. "That's impossible." Montgomery looked at his client, confused. "Who is that? Ideally, we can object to his presence." "You idiot," Rick hissed, his voice trembling. "That's Theodore Blackwood." The name rippled through the courtroom like an electric shock. Theodore Blackwood, the Oracle of London, the CEO of Blackwood & Co., the largest private equity firm on the planet. A man who didn't give interviews, didn't appear in public, and certainly didn't show up in family court in downtown Manhattan. He was a ghost who moved trillions of dollars with a phone call. Sarah Halloway didn't turn around. She remained standing, looking at the judge. Blackwood stopped right beside Sarah. He handed his cane to one of the bodyguards. Then, in a move that made the stenographer gasp, the billionaire bowed. It wasn't a polite nod. It was a bow of deference, a subordinate bowing to a superior. "Apologies for the delay, ma'am," Blackwood said, his British accent crisp and clear in the silent room. "The traffic on Fifth Avenue was dreadful. I have brought the documents you requested." He gestured to the aides, who unlocked the briefcases and placed them on Sarah's wobbly table. Sarah finally looked at Rick. The fear in his eyes was the most satisfying thing she had ever seen. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice ringing out, "my witness has arrived. Mr. Blackwood is not here to testify about my character. He is here to testify about the true ownership of Jasson Dynamics." Judge Cross looked stunned. She stammered, "Mr. Blackwood, you are involved in this domestic case?" Theodore Blackwood turned slowly to face the judge. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Domestic case? Oh no, Your Honor. This isn't a domestic case." He placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "This is a corporate acquisition. You see, Mr. Jasson thinks he owns his company. But as of 9 a.m. this morning, my client, Miss Halloway, has executed a hostile takeover of all his outstanding debt." Rick jumped to his feet. "You're lying. She's a waitress." "She was," Blackwood said calmly, "until she activated the clause in the Ether Protocol that you were too arrogant to read, the dead man's switch. It routed all royalties to a shell corporation in the Caymans, a corporation I manage. And that corporation just bought you out. Sarah smiled. Hello, Rick. I think you're sitting in my chair. For 10 seconds, the only sound in the courtroom was the hum of the ventilation system and the distant wail of a police siren outside a fitting soundtrack for the catastrophe unfolding at the plaintiff's table. Order! Judge Cross finally slammed her gavel, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Order in this court. Mr. Montgomery, control your client. Rick Jason was standing, his face a mask of purple rage. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. She's insane. She's hacking my company. Arrest her. Sit down, Mr. Jason, Judge Cross barked. She turned her gaze to the billionaire, standing calmly beside Sarah. Mr. Blackwood, this is highly irregular. You cannot simply walk into a family court hearing and declare a corporate takeover. This is a custody hearing regarding the minor child, Lily Jason. Theodore Blackwood smoothed his silk tie. With respect, Your Honor, the custody of the child is predicated on the father's ability to provide a stable environment. Mr. Jason's petition claims he is the sole provider and that Miss Halloway is destitute. I am here to prove that as of 8:45 a.m., Mr. Jason is not only bankrupt, but is currently under investigation by the SEC for massive fraud. Lies, Rick screamed. My company is worth $4 billion. Your company, Sarah spoke up, her voice cutting through Rick's hysteria like a razor, is built on stolen code. Code that I wrote. She walked to the table, where Blackwood's aides had placed the metal briefcases. She opened the first one. Inside wasn't money. It was a single, ancient-looking hard drive and a stack of notarized documents stamped with the seal of the Swiss Federal Institute of Intellectual Property. Charles, Sarah said, addressing Rick's shark of a lawyer directly. Montgomery blinked, surprised she even knew his first name. Do you know what a dead man's switch is in cryptography? Montgomery straightened his jacket, trying to regain his composure. It is a failsafe. If the operator stops responding, the system activates. Correct, Sarah said. She picked up a document. Rick, do you remember when you locked me out of the servers 3 years ago? When you changed the passwords and told the board I was having a breakdown? You thought you cut me out. She turned to face the gallery, holding the document up. But the Ether protocol has a heartbeat. Every 24 hours, it pings a server looking for my digital signature. If it doesn't get it, it assumes I am dead or compromised. For the first 6 months, nothing happened. It just listened. Rick was breathing hard now, sweat beading on his forehead. You're bluffing. The code works fine. We've been selling licenses to the Pentagon. You've been selling a mirror, Sarah said coldly. When the switch activated, the protocol didn't shut down. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it bifurcated. It created a copy of every single transaction, every email, every backdoor deal you made, and sent it to a secure server in Zurich. Sarah dropped the heavy stack of papers onto Rick's table. They landed with a heavy thud in front of Montgomery. That is 3 years of your private ledger, Rick. Every bribe you paid to senators to get those defense contracts. Every penny you laundered through shell companies in Panama. And every time you claimed the code was yours, the blockchain time-stamped it as mine. Montgomery picked up the top sheet. His eyes widened. He flipped to the next page, then the next. His face went from arrogant to ashen gray in the span of 10 seconds. My God, Montgomery whispered. He looked at Rick with genuine horror. You leveraged the company assets against unverified IP? Rick, this is federal wire fraud. Fix it! Rick hissed at him, grabbing his arm. I pay you to fix it. Montgomery pulled his arm away violently. I am an attorney, Rick, not a magician. You told me you owned the IP free and clear. If these timestamps are real, they are, Blackwood interjected smoothly. And since Mr. Jason used the company stock as collateral for his personal loans which my firm, Blackwood & Co., purchased this morning from your creditors, I have called in the debt. Blackwood leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You are in default, Mr. Jason. The house in the Hamptons? Mine. The penthouse on 57th Street? Mine. The cars outside? Mine. And the retainer for Mr. Montgomery? Blackwood looked at the lawyer. The check is going to bounce, Charles. Montgomery froze. He looked at the judge, then at his client. In a move that shocked the entire courtroom, Charles Montgomery began packing his briefcase. Charles? Rick stammered. What are you doing? Withdrawing as counsel, Montgomery said, snapping his briefcase shut. Your Honor, I must recuse myself. My client has manifestly lied to me regarding the foundational facts of this case. I cannot suborn perjury. You can't leave me, Rick roared, lunging for him. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his taser. Mr. Jason, sit down. Sarah watched it all with a face of stone. She didn't smile. This wasn't funny. This was the demolition of the man who had tried to destroy her daughter's future. Mr. Jason, Judge Cross said, her voice icy, you are currently without counsel. Do you wish to request a recess to find a public defender? Because based on what I am hearing, you can no longer afford private counsel. The humiliation was absolute. Rick Jason, the golden boy of tech, was being offered a public defender. But Rick wasn't done. The narcissist in him couldn't accept defeat. He looked at Sarah, and his eyes went black with a different kind of malice. You think this is over? Rick whispered, his voice trembling with a dangerous energy. You think you can just take my money and walk away with Lily? You have no idea who I'm in business with, Sarah. You have no idea what you've just started. Is that a threat, Mr. Jason? Judge Cross asked sharply. It's a fact, Rick spat. He stood up, ignoring the bailiff. He looked wild now, his tie crooked, his hair disheveled. She thinks she's clever. She thinks she's the hero. But she just stole from the Vanguard cartel. The room went dead silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. Sarah didn't flinch. She had been expecting this. I didn't steal from them, Rick, Sarah said calmly. You did. You promised them a decryption key for their communications network. A key you couldn't deliver because you didn't know how the code worked. Rick's face drained of color. How do you know that? Because, Sarah said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small, encrypted USB drive. They contacted me. A collective gasp went through the gallery. Theodore Blackwood stepped forward, placing a protective hand on the table near Sarah. His bodyguards at the back of the room shifted, their hands hovering near their jackets. The atmosphere in the room shifted from legal drama to something much darker. Your Honor, Sarah addressed the judge, for the last 6 months, Mr. Jason has been selling backdoor access to the Ether Protocol to a group of international arms dealers known as the Vanguard Syndicate. He took a down payment of $50 million. He spent it on his yacht, his cars, and this lawsuit. She pointed at Rick. But the code didn't work. The syndicate is angry. They want their money back, or they want the product. Rick doesn't have either, so he planned to take full custody of our daughter Lily and use her. Use her? Judge Cross looked sick. In what way? As leverage, Sarah said, her voice finally breaking with emotion. He was going to flee the country with her. He has non-extradition papers ready for a flight to Montenegro, leaving tonight at 6 p.m. That is a lie, Rick screamed. She's paranoid. She's delusional. Your Honor, Blackwood interjected. If I may, he signaled to one of his aides, who brought a laptop to the judge's bench. This is a forensic recovery of Mr. Jason's cloud backups, obtained legally through the corporate acquisition I just completed. It contains an email thread from yesterday. Subject line, the package. Judge Cross put on her glasses. She read the screen. Her eyes widened. She scrolled down. Then she stopped, her hand covering her mouth. She looked up at Rick Jason with an expression of pure revulsion. Mr. Jason, the judge said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. This email confirms a flight manifest for you and one minor. It also discusses collateral assurance for a debt owed to a Mr. Ivanov. Rick froze. The name Ivanov hung in the air like toxic smoke. Bailiff, Judge Cross said, pointing a finger at Rick, take Mr. Jason into custody immediately. I am holding him in contempt, and I am referring this matter to the FBI within the hour. You can't do this, Rick shouted, As the bailiff moved in, he scrambled backward, knocking his chair over. I am a dual citizen. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, the bailiff grunted, grabbing Rick's arm and twisting it behind his back. Rick struggled, kicking out. Sarah, Sarah, tell them. Tell them I need to leave. If I don't leave, they'll kill me. Sarah, please. Sarah watched him. For years, she had feared this man. She had flinched at his voice. She had hidden in bathrooms while he screamed at her. Now, seeing him pinned against the table, begging for her help, she felt nothing. No, not nothing. She felt clarity. I can't help you, Rick, Sarah said softly. You made a deal with the devil. I just turned on the lights. As the bailiff slapped the handcuffs on Rick's wrists, the metallic click-click echoing through the stunned courtroom, the doors at the back of the room burst open again. But this time, it wasn't bodyguards. It was the press. Someone had tipped them off. Dozens of cameras flashed, blindingly bright. Reporters shouted questions. Mr. Jasson, is it true you defrauded the Pentagon? Miss Holloway, did you really invent the ether protocol? Is it true the cartel is involved? Rick tried to hide his face, but there was nowhere to go. The king of tech was being dragged out like a common criminal. As they hauled him away, he locked eyes with Sarah one last time. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked terrified. They're coming, Sarah, he mouthed. They're coming for the key. Sarah watched him disappear out the side door. She stood alone at the table, the flashbulbs popping like lightning storms behind her. Theodore Blackwood leaned in close to her ear. He's right, you know, the billionaire whispered gravely. Ivanov isn't going to stop just because Rick is in jail. You have the code, which means you are the target now. Sarah picked up her cheap laptop bag. She straightened her oversized blazer. She looked at Blackwood, and for the first time, the shy student was gone completely. In her place was the woman who had outsmarted a genius. Let them come, Sarah said. I didn't just write a dead man's switch, Theodore. I wrote a weapon, and I'm ready to use it. Judge Cross banged her gavel. Case dismissed. Full custody awarded to the mother. Court is adjourned. But as Sarah turned to leave, she saw a man standing at the very back of the gallery. He wasn't a reporter. He wasn't a lawyer. He was wearing a long gray coat and watching her with absolute stillness. He tapped his ear, whispered something, and walked out. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Theodore, she said, get the car. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung shut behind them, sealing off the stale air of the legal battle, but stepping outside offered no relief. The storm had evolved from a dreary morning drizzle into a violent, thrashing deluge. The sky over Manhattan was a bruised purple, low and oppressive, and the rain came down in sheets so thick they blurred the towering skyscrapers into gray ghosts. Sarah Holloway stepped onto the slick pavement of Liberty Street, and the world exploded into noise. It wasn't just the thunder cracking overhead. It was the roar of the press. A sea of umbrellas and flashing cameras surged against the police barricades. They were hungry. They had smelled blood, in the water Rick Jasson's blood, and now they wanted the woman who had spilled it. Miss Holloway, over here. Did you really bankrupt Jasson Dynamics? Sarah, are you afraid of the cartel retaliating? Is the ether protocol a weapon? The Pentagon is asking for a comment. Sarah didn't answer. She kept her head down, clutching the strap of her battered laptop bag like a lifeline. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the cameras and everything to do with the man she had seen in the back of the courtroom. Theodore Blackwood was right beside her, his presence a solid wall against the chaos. His security detail, 4 men who moved with the fluid precision of apex predators, formed a diamond formation around her. Eyes forward, Sarah, Blackwood murmured, his voice low but cutting through the din. Do not engage. Do not stop. He's here, Theodore, Sarah whispered, her eyes darting to the perimeter. The man in the gray coat. I feel him. We are moving, Blackwood signaled. Get her in the car. Now. A convoy of 3 armored Cadillac Escalades idled at the curb, their engines purring with a low, guttural menace. A bodyguard ripped open the rear door of the middle vehicle, Just as Sarah ducked her head to enter, she saw him. Across the street, standing perfectly still next to a steaming hot dog cart, was the man. He wore a long, charcoal wool coat that was soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice the rain. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking directly at her. He raised his left hand slowly to his ear, tapping a concealed earpiece. His lips moved a single, sharp command. "He's signaling!" Sarah cried out, scrambling into the leather seat. "Go! Go! Go!" Blackwood shouted, diving in after her and slamming the heavy door. The lock engaged with a dull, reassuring thunk. The driver, a man with a thick neck and eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, floored the accelerator. The tires shrieked against the wet asphalt, fighting for traction before the heavy SUV lunged forward, pressing Sarah deep into the plush leather. "We are compromised," Blackwood said into his satellite phone, his tone clipped and professional. "Route black is burned. Initiate route gold. I want air support on standby." Sarah stared out the tinted window as the city blurred past. The rain was drumming a frantic beat against the bulletproof glass. "Where are we going?" "Safe house in Connecticut," Blackwood replied, not looking up from his phone. "It's a fortress. Underground bunker, independent power grid, satellite uplink. Once you're there, not even the Vanguard Syndicate can touch you." "Connecticut is 90 minutes away," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We won't make it to the bridge." Blackwood looked at her, his brows knitting together. "My drivers are the best in the business. We have the element of surprise." "No," Sarah shook her head, the data patterns in her mind rearranging themselves into a terrifying conclusion. "We don't. Look at the traffic." They were speeding north on the FDR Drive. Usually, at this time of day, it was a parking lot, but the lanes ahead were strangely open, while the lanes behind them were clogging up. "They aren't following us, Theodore," Sarah said, pointing to the side mirror. "They're hurting us." Blackwood turned to look. Two black sport motorcycles were weaving through the gridlock traffic behind them. They moved with suicidal speed, cutting off cars, forcing drivers to slam on their brakes. They were creating a blockage, ensuring no other civilian cars could get close to the convoy. "Motorcycles at 6 o'clock, the driver shouted. "They're armed." "Evasive maneuvers," Blackwood barked. "Get us off the highway." The driver yanked the wheel to the right, aiming for the nearest exit ramp. The SUV swerved violently, the suspension groaning under the weight of the armor plating. But as they crested the ramp, a white delivery van with no markings screeched out from the underpass. It didn't try to merge. It turned sideways, jackknifing across the narrow exit lane, blocking it completely. "Trap," the driver screamed. He slammed on the brakes. The Escalade skidded on the wet concrete, fishtailing dangerously before coming to a halt just inches from the van's bumper. The two escort vehicles behind them slammed into each other, metal crunching. Suddenly, the world went silent for a heartbeat. The rain poured down, washing over the wreckage. Then, the doors of the white van flew open. 4 men, in full tactical gear, black body armor, balaclavas, and assault rifles, spilled out. They didn't fire. They took up positions behind the van, weapons raised, aiming directly at the windshield of Sarah's car. From the rear, the roar of the motorcycles grew deafening. They pulled up on either side of the SUV, blocking any retreat. "We're boxed in," the driver said, his voice tight with fear. "Sir, I can't ram the van. It's reinforced. If I try, we'll be immobilized." "Lock the doors," Blackwood ordered, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a sleek, silver handgun. "Nobody opens a door unless I say so. Sarah, get down." Sarah didn't get down. She sat frozen, staring at the side of the road. Walking calmly through the rain, stepping over the guardrail with the grace of a man taking a Sunday stroll, was the man in the gray coat. He walked right up to the SUV. He didn't have a weapon drawn. He didn't need one. He had complete control of the board. He stopped at Sarah's window. The water ran down his face, dripping off his nose, but his expression was eerily pleasant. He raised his hand and knocked on the reinforced glass. Knock, knock, knock. It was a polite, almost gentlemanly sound. He held up a smartphone to the window. The screen was bright against the gloom of the storm. Sarah leaned forward, squinting. The video on the screen was live. It showed a playground, a brightly colored plastic slide, a swing set swaying in the wind. And sitting on the swing, wearing her favorite yellow raincoat and splashing her boots in a puddle, was a little girl, Lily. The air left Sarah's lungs as if she'd been punched. "No," she gasped, a sound that was half sob, half scream. "No, no, no." The man in the gray coat smiled. He pointed to the phone, then to the window, and made a roll-down motion with his hand. "Do not open that window," Blackwood shouted, grabbing Sarah's shoulder. "It's a trick. My team is at the school. That video could be a deep fake. It could be old footage." "It's raining in the video, Theodore," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "And she's wearing the boots I bought her yesterday. It's live." She looked at Blackwood, her eyes pleading. "They have her. If I don't talk to him, they will hurt her." Blackwood hesitated. He looked at the armed men surrounding them, then at the terrified mother beside him. He cursed under his breath. "Crack it," Blackwood ordered the driver. 2 inches. But keep your foot on the gas." The driver pressed a button. The heavy glass slid down with a mechanical whir, stopping, leaving a small gap. The smell of rain and exhaust fumes flooded the cabin. "Miss Holloway," the man in the gray coat said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with a thick Eastern European accent that wrapped around the vowels. "My name is Nikolai. My employer sends his regards. He was very impressed with your performance in court today. You destroyed a billionaire in under 10 minutes. Efficient." "Let her go," Sarah said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "She is a child. She has nothing to do with this. Please. I'll give you money. I have access to Jason's accounts now. Take it all." Nikolai chuckled softly. "Money? Miss Holloway, we represent the directorate. We print money. We topple governments. We do not want your dollars. We want the key." He leaned closer, his gray eyes boring into hers. "The Ether Protocol. You locked us out. You froze our communications. We have clients, very dangerous clients who are currently blind because of your little algorithm. Give me the decryption key, right now, and the girl goes home to her mother. Refuse. And the swing set becomes empty." Sarah stared at the screen. In the video, a large hand appeared in the frame, resting on the chain of the swing, just inches from Lily's head. Fear, cold and paralyzing, washed over Sarah. She felt like she was drowning. She looked at the laptop in her bag. She could give it to him. She could type in the code, unlock the servers, and let them have it. It was just code. It was just math. But then, she remembered what the protocol actually was. If she gave them the key, they would have total invisibility. They would be able to traffic weapons, drugs, and people without any government on Earth being able to trace them. Thousands would die, maybe millions. But Lily, Sarah closed her eyes. She took a breath, and in that darkness, something shifted. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It crystallized. It hardened into something sharp and cold. She remembered the years of hiding, the years of Rick telling her she was weak, the years of being afraid of her own shadow. They laughed when she entered the court alone. She opened her eyes. The tears were gone. "You think you have the leverage," Sarah said. Her voice was no longer shaking. It was quiet, steady, and terrifyingly calm. Nikolai blinked, surprised by the shift in her tone. "I have a gun and your daughter, Miss Holloway. In poker, that is called a royal flush." "No," Sarah said. She reached into her bag. Nikolai tensed, his hand going to his coat pocket. But she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out her laptop. She opened it, the screen glowing blue in the dim car. She turned it so Nikolai could see through the gap in the window. "You are holding a pair of twos, Nikolai, and you are bluffing." "I do not bluff," Nikolai snarled, his patience thinning. "You think the Ether Protocol is just an encryption shield," Sarah said, typing rapidly as she spoke. "Rick thought that too. The Pentagon thinks that. But I didn't build a lock. I built a mirror." She hit enter. On the screen, a cascade of data began to scroll. It moved so fast it was a blur of neon text. "What is this?" Nikolai asked, frowning. Every time your boss, Viktor Volkov, tried to brute force my server, the protocol didn't just block him, Sarah explained, her voice gaining strength with every word. It absorbed the attack. It traced the signal back through the VPNs, through the satellite relays, through the dark web nodes. It didn't just stop at his computer. It downloaded his entire life. Nikolai went still. The rain dripped from the brim of his nose, unnoticed. I have the names of every operative in the directorate, Sarah continued. I have the GPS coordinates of your training camps in Belarus. I have the ledger of every bribe you've paid to every politician in Washington and London. She tapped a specific file on the screen. It opened to display a photo. It was a photo of a young woman, roughly 20 years old, sitting in a cafe in Zurich. And this, Sarah said, leaning closer to the glass, is Volkov's daughter Katya. She studies art history at the University of Zurich. She lives at 42 Bahnhofstrasse. She takes her coffee with almond milk. Nikolai's face drained of all color. He stepped back, his hand falling away from the window. You wouldn't. I am a mother, Sarah hissed. The ferocity in her voice made Blackwood flinch. You are threatening my child? You have no idea what I am capable of. I have set a dead man's switch on this file. If anything happens to Lily, if she scrapes her knee, if she cries, if she is even 5 minutes late for dinner, this file goes to Interpol, the CIA, and the FSB. Volkov will be dead before the sun sets. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Nikolai stared at her. He looked for the fear. He looked for the bluff. But all he saw was the absolute, unyielding resolve of a woman who had burned her bridges and was ready to burn the world. Call him, Sarah commanded. Call Volkov. Tell him the price of the ether protocol just went up. Nikolai hesitated. He looked at the phone in his hand, the one showing Lily, and then at the woman in the car. He realized, with a dawn of horror, that he was not the hunter. He was the prey. He dialed a number. He spoke rapidly in Russian, his voice low and urgent. Sarah watched him, her hand resting on the send key of her laptop. She didn't blink. Nikolai listened. He nodded. He swallowed hard. He hung up the phone and looked at Sarah with a new expression. Respect. The girl is released, Nikolai said quietly. My team at the playground is standing down. She is being escorted to your security detail as we speak. Sarah didn't relax. I want confirmation. Nikolai turned his phone screen to her. The video feed changed. It showed one of Blackwood's security guards, a man Sarah recognized, running onto the playground, scooping Lily up into his arms and rushing her toward a waiting armored car. Only then did Sarah let out the breath she had been holding. Mr. Volkov would like to discuss a partnership, Nikolai said, stepping back from the car. He believes your talents are wasted on the private sector. Tell him there is no partnership, Sarah said coldly. Tell him that if he ever comes near my family again, I won't just leak his files. I will delete his money, every cent. I will leave him destitute in a Siberian winter. Do we understand each other? Nikolai nodded once. A sharp, military nod. He raised his hand and waved to the men in the van. Clear the road, he shouted. The men in tactical gear lowered their weapons. They scrambled back into the van. The driver threw it into reverse, tires spinning, clearing the path. The motorcycles roared to life and peeled away, disappearing into the rain. Drive, Sarah whispered, her energy suddenly crashing. She slumped back into the seat, her hands trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading. The driver didn't need to be told twice. He floored it, shooting the gap and speeding toward the open highway. Theodore Blackwood stared at Sarah as if he had never seen her before. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his brow, despite the chill in the car. I have negotiated with warlords, dictators, and kings, the billionaire said softly, shaking his head. But remind me, Sarah, never, ever to play poker with you. Sarah looked out the window at the receding skyline of New York. The rain was still falling, but the storm felt different now. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was just water. It wasn't poker, Theodore, she said, closing her laptop. It was chess. and I just put the king in check. 3 months later, the storm that had raged over New York City had long since passed, replaced by a crisp, golden autumn. The air was clear, sharp, and biting much like the woman sitting at the head of the mahogany table on the 50th floor of the One World Trade Center. The sign on the glass doors no longer read Jason Dynamics. The chrome letters had been torn down the day after the trial. In their place, etched in simple, elegant frosted glass, was a new name, Holloway Systems. Sarah Holloway sat in a high-backed leather chair, staring out at the panoramic view of Manhattan. The city that had once ignored her, the city that had watched her walk into court in a thrift store suit and laughed, now lay sprawled beneath her feet like a conquered kingdom. She wasn't wearing the ill-fitting gray suit anymore. Today, she wore a bespoke white blazer, tailored to perfection, with a silk blouse that cost more than her old apartment's rent for a year. Her hair, once messy and damp, was styled in a sleek, professional bob. Around the table sat 12 men and women, the board of directors. They were silent, waiting for her to speak. "The quarterly earnings are in," the chief financial officer said, breaking the silence. He adjusted his glasses nervously. "Since the rebranding and the pivot from defense contracts to corporate cybersecurity, our stock price has risen 400%. The market has responded enthusiastically to your leadership, Miss Holloway." "Good," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the room with effortless authority. She didn't look up from her tablet. And the legacy issues? The general counsel, a sharp woman named Patricia, cleared her throat. The final appeal for Richard Jason was denied yesterday. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He has been transferred to a maximum security federal facility in Terre Haute. He is serving a 15-year sentence with no possibility of parole for at least 12. Sarah nodded once. Rick was gone. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had made her feel small and worthless, was now just a number in a database. He was a ghost in the machine she now controlled. "And the external threats?" asked a board member named Karen, her voice lowering. Everyone knew what she meant. The directorate, the cartel, the people in the shadows. Sarah finally looked up. She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the territory better than anyone else. "Neutralized," Sarah said simply. "We have come to an understanding with Mr. Volkov. He knows that the dead man's switch is still active. As long as Holloway Systems remains profitable and my family remains safe, his own secrets stay buried. Mutual destruction is a powerful motivator for peace, Karen." She stood up. Meeting adjourned. The suits filed out quickly, eager to escape the intensity of her gaze. Sarah walked to the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Hudson River in shades of fire and blood. The door behind her creaked open. "Mommy!" The sharpness in Sarah's face vanished instantly. She turned, crouching down just as a blur of yellow fabric collided with her legs. Lily, now 6 years old and beaming, wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck. She smelled of crayons and strawberry shampoo, the scent of a childhood that had been saved. "Did you finish being the boss?" Lily asked, looking up with wide, trusting eyes. "Yes, baby," Sarah said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I finished it all. No more work today." "Good." A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. "Because I promised this young lady the largest ice cream sundae in Manhattan, and I am a man of my word." Theodore Blackwood stood there, leaning on his ivory-handled cane. He looked older, tired perhaps, but his eyes twinkled with genuine warmth. He wasn't just the billionaire investor anymore. He was the only family they had left. "You spoil her, Theo," Sarah said, standing up and taking Lily's hand. "It is the prerogative of the godfather," Blackwood said, with a wink. "Godfather?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I filed the paperwork this morning," Blackwood said, his tone turning serious for a moment. "I thought it was time we made the alliance official. Assuming you approve?" Sarah looked at the man who had stood by her when the world was falling apart. Then she looked down at the daughter who was her reason for breathing. She had walked into that courtroom 3 months ago with nothing. She had been terrified, broke, and alone. They had laughed at her silence. They had mocked her poverty. But they had forgotten the most important rule of the game. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board, but she starts the game standing still. It is only when she moves when she is threatened that the game truly begins. I approve, Sarah said softly. Now, let's go get that ice cream. She grabbed her bag, a new one, sleek black leather, and walked out the door. The lights of the city twinkled below, a million little stars bowing to the woman who had conquered the dark. And that is how Sarah Holloway went from a forgotten footnote to the most powerful woman in tech. She proved that when your back is against the wall, you don't need a hero to save you. You just need to realize that you are the weapon. Rick Jasson learned the hard way that you never, ever underestimate a mother protecting her child. What do you think? Was Sarah's dead man switch ethical, or did she go too far by threatening the cartel boss? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a new saga coming next week about a janitor who accidentally solved a math problem that NASA couldn't crack. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.